Before the oil spill, pelicans and other birds flocked to Barataria Bay. Now, some of those places look a lot different.
My business is shut down. My trucks, boats.
There's a mother dolphin pushing her dead baby, mournfully pushing it around in the water.
I can handle hurricanes, but to handle oil spill, you know, it's a whole different ball game.
Thank you for joining us for this WWL Investigates special series on the BP oil spill. I'm David Hammer. In our first episode, I took you through the 6 steps that doomed the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig. And now we're focused on the environmental impacts. That aspect of the story kept changing as we learned more and more about the extent of the oil spill. At first, we thought the well was plugged and the oil that was escaping was from the rig that blew up and sank. Then we learned the oil was still spewing into the Gulf, much more oil than BP initially admitted. 3 days after the Deepwater Horizon rig exploded in the Gulf, response crews worked to clean up the oil spill. The rig sunk below the surface of the water, and initially, a Coast Guard commander said based on visuals from a remotely operated vehicle, it did not appear oil was leaking from the wreckage. Crews focused on the large oil slick they could see on the water's surface.
We do have active skimming operations for a slick that's about 1 mile to 12 miles long, 40 some miles offshore. This slick is light rainbow sheen, emulsified crude left over from the explosion. We've been actively working for over 24 hours to secure and clean up that spill so nothing reaches the shoreline. Then
Governor Bobby Jindal huddled with state emergency responders to discuss the spill and to get an update from the Coast Guard on the status of the cleanup. Pat Santos was with the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries.
The Department of Wildlife and Fisheries have 2 32-foot vessels with crews assisting the United States Coast Guard. But we definitely don't want our coastline affected at all. We have a lot to lose, and you know, that's our biggest concern right now, and that's why we're engaged in keeping an eye on things.
The government relied entirely on BP to tell them how much oil was leaking. At first, the company said it was 1,000 barrels a day. Later, we learned it was actually 60 times larger. The Coast Guard spent 3 days looking for 11 missing crew members, hoping they'd survive the blast.
There was a sense that these 11 members might have been in the vicinity of this explosion when it initially occurred.
On Friday, April 23rd, the Coast Guard called off the search. A week after the explosion, emergency managers had set up a command center in Houma to coordinate the massive response effort.
Everything that goes on once the oil's hit the surface of the water, we do it here. We plan it and we execute it.
That was Coast Guard Captain Ed Stanton. He said every large skimming vessel along the Gulf Coast and some from as far away as Delaware responded to the spill. Responders sprayed about 12,000 gallons per day of dispersant on the oil, trying to break up the thick chunks of crude before they made landfall. The Coast Guard was also proactively putting out containment boom near sensitive environmental nesting areas offshore.
There's over 100,000 feet of boom that's been staged, and it's now being deployed around Pass Alutra, South Pass, Southeast Pass, the north end of Breton Island, the north end of Chandeleur Island.
This is where environmental scientists believe the oil spill is right now. The light color represents that thin oil sheen. The darker colors are those emulsified pieces of crude that can really do a lot of damage in the marsh. Right now you see the sheen is about 24 miles off the coast of Plaquemines Parish and about 50 miles off the coast of St. Bernard.
Right now it looks like if we do have any shoreside impact, it's going to be east of the Mississippi River.
By May of 2010, the winds and currents had shifted, and areas west of the Mississippi River started drafting plans to defend from the impacts of BP's leaking oil. Here's Grand Isle Mayor David Carmidel.
I can handle hurricanes, but to handle oil spill, you know, it's a whole different ball game. But we're going to handle it.
State and local leaders toured the waters off Grand Isle by helicopter, then met with then-Governor Bobby Jindal at a local community center. The governor announced plans to block 4 passes, weeding inland to the sensitive coastal wetlands. Crews use thousands of feet of hard and absorbent boom. Long sandbags known as boudin bags and sand-filled tubes known as burrito levees, both used to protect the island from hurricanes, were also deployed.
If we can stop the oil at the passes, we can keep it out of the Barataria Bay, we can keep it out of the interior where the wetlands are much more fragile and be much harder to protect.
Jefferson Parish has 21 miles of coastline that we are working to protect between Plaquemines and Lafourche Parish.
Fishermen in this area caught more than 12 million pounds of seafood a year. They were just getting into their busy season, May through December.
If they can't catch their crabs and shrimp and fish and the charter boats don't go out, that's these people's livelihoods.
Less than 2 months after the spill, we would learn that one of the tactics for breaking up the oil would also hide it under the surface of the Gulf. That might have kept some of the oil out of sensitive marshes, but researchers were worried about how that was going to affect the entire Gulf ecosystem. Now here's Paul Murphy, this time from June 2010.
BP strongly questioned the presence of oil from its leaking well accumulating below the surface of the Gulf of Mexico. Today, the head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration made this announcement.
And NOAA is confirming the presence of very low concentrations of subsurface oil at sampling depths ranging from the surface to 3,300 feet.
Tests conducted by NOAA and the University of South Florida found 2 massive plumes of oil. One is located 42 miles northeast of the Deepwater Horizon site. Another is 142 miles southeast of the spill, but further tests showed that oil is not consistent with oil from the leaking wellhead. Tulane research ecologist Tom Shannon says natural oil seepage does occur, but he believes both plumes are from the BP spill.
And this has never been detected before that I know of. So circumstantially, it would be very difficult to say that this comes from something other than this leak or something of this size.
Dr. Shannon expects researchers will find many more subsea oil clouds in the Gulf.
Considering how much oil has come out of this well, a majority of it has to be under the water or somehow dispersed within the water column.
Shannon says once the oil gets in the water column, it's next to impossible to remove. And he predicts major damage to underwater ecosystems where fish and other marine life live and grow.
Oh, it sets up end game for the coral reefs. If it hits the coral reefs, that's it.
NOAA research vessels such as this boat docked in New Orleans last week are now cruising the Gulf, testing for additional concentrations of underwater oil.
We remain concerned about the location of oil on the surface and under the sea. We and our academic partners, such as the University of South Florida, will remain vigilant in our search for answers.
Dr. Shannon says chemicals used to disperse the oil could be to blame for the underwater plumes.
I mean, the whole idea of a dispersant is to disperse the oil throughout the water, to allow it to mix, if you will, with the water, to allow it to dilute out into the water.
With the oil suspended in plumes, it began affecting the Gulf food chain. Shrimping, fishing, oyster harvesting were all either shut down or severely limited. Here's Maya Rodriguez with the impacts on the fishing communities south of New Orleans.
In Plaquemines Parish, hard hit by the oil spill, Byron Uncolade's trucking and fisheries business is no longer open for business.
All my business is shut down, my trucks, boats.
Which is why Uncolade and many here are relying on the BP claims process to help them make up for lost wages and livelihoods.
This is where the fishermen live at, along these bayous.
As for the $20 billion compensation fund set up by BP at the request of President Obama, Uncolade and others now wonder just how soon they will see those funds. The president appointed Kenneth Feinberg, who oversaw the 9/11 Victims Fund, to now oversee this one.
I think Mr. Feinberg needs to move very, very quickly to clarify what the processes are, to clarify the eligibility requirements, so that this compensation fund can get up and running very quickly.
Current National Urban League president and former New Orleans Mayor Mark Morial spent Saturday in Plaquemines Parish assessing the oil spill cleanup and speaking with small business owners impacted by the spill.
A lot of the people who work in this industry work for themselves. And while they may hire themselves out to others, they work for themselves. They're independent. And because they're independent, they rely on that week to week. work to be able to have the money they need to take care of their families. So we want to find out and certainly make sure that within the claims process that their rights are going to be fully recognized.
It's a similar concern for Plaquemines Parish President Billy Nungesser, who says the parish has hired additional translators to help answer questions for fishermen who may not speak English well.
I'm intimidated in some of the meetings with BP. I can imagine someone that doesn't speak English. They have their own interpreters, but we wanted ours to represent our local fishermen, to sit at the table so they know they have someone.
Among the translators hired include those who speak Cambodian and Vietnamese, two communities with a strong presence in the Plaquemines fishing industry.
A few months before the Deepwater Horizon disaster, WWL staff members volunteered for a coastal erosion project, planting young seedlings, hoping to avoid coastal erosion on Fifi Island that threatened to wash that island away. After the oil spill, we were back and found tar balls among those young plants. Now here's Maya Rodriguez from July 14th, 2010.
Just north of the state's only inhabited barrier island sits one of Louisiana's many uninhabited islands. Made up of marsh grasses and black mangroves, Fifi Island provides much-needed storm protection for its neighbor to the south, Grand Isle.
Fifi Island has helped from a coastal restoration standpoint, because when you have a hurricane that passes us and you have wave action that comes out of the north, then basically that helps to break up some of that wave action.
With that in mind, Jefferson Parish launched an aggressive effort earlier this year to save Fifi Island. Eyewitness News was there this past spring as hundreds of volunteers spent 2 days planting more than 1,600 vegetation seedlings on the island. Seedlings that now have some unwanted company. Volunteers finished planting mangroves and marsh grasses here on Fifi Island on April 17th, a mere 3 days before the Deepwater Horizon rig exploded. 3 months later, the oil spill's effects are being felt here on the island in the form of tar balls washing up on shore. And it's not just tar balls, but blobs of oil as well that moved in through nearby passes and eventually made their way onto the island.
It's disconcerting.
Jason Smith coordinates coastal programs for Jefferson Parish and helped oversee the restoration project here this past April.
Everything's going to be about monitoring.
He came to check on Fifi Island for the first time since the spill and came away from the experience with a new checklist for what to look for on future island visits. It's a list that now includes oil-related material.
Obviously, this area and other islands and other marsh areas are always going to be monitored continually, gathering data, because sometimes when you look at areas that look clean, sometimes they're not clean.
And that's a concern, because if enough oil ends up on Fifi Island, it could create a domino effect in the long run, not just here, but for other coastal areas as well.
10 years ago, on the 5th anniversary of the oil spill, BP released a new report saying that the Gulf was essentially clean, but I kept finding evidence of oil and of wildlife suffering. BP's 5th anniversary report on Monday said its active oil spill cleanup operations ended a year ago, and there was no lasting impact on the Gulf environment. Now, on the same day that BP released a new report saying that all was well in the Gulf of Mexico, we heard that there was actually a huge tar mat that came ashore near Four Bayou Pass. We're headed there right now, and we can see the boats gathering from BP's cleanup crew. This is Grand Terre 2, a key barrier island about 5 miles east of Grand Isle. BP cleanup crews are gathering bags of oil sand mix and loading them on supply vessels for disposal. Now we're on the island and we're heading over to the center of their cleanup operations. We're told that because of hazardous materials, we're not going to be able to get too close to the operation, and that folks there are wearing their personal protective equipment. The crews have been here for more than 2 weeks and have collected 22,000 pounds of oiled material. That's 5 times more than in the whole last year combined. But the Coast Guard was only informed about it on Friday.
We had Coast Guard petty officers go down today and try to identify that tar mat to try and find out who the responsible party for that tar mat might be. Now, since then, BP has accepted some responsibility, and if it is identified, they will accept full responsibility, obviously.
We heard about the tar mat from Greg Blanchard, the brother of outspoken Grand Isle shrimper Dean Blanchard.
They trying to see that it's over and it's done, you know, and it's not. It's far from being done. There's still going to be a lot of more oil washing up on the beach.
Kyle Graham is the head of the State Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority and Louisiana's trustee in the ongoing process of assessing natural resource damages on BP. He says this tarmac proves that BP's rosy picture of the Gulf is premature.
I think they actually believe it. They actually believe that the Gulf, that the actions that they've done in response have healed the Gulf, and that all of the decades worth of knowledge we have about the effects of oil on these natural environments, the likelihood that these effects will last for generations isn't true.
BP says it has done extensive monitoring at Grand Terre over the years, digging thousands of holes to make sure all of the buried oil is collected. What's more, BP spokesman Jeff Morrell suggested the state is partly to blame for burying the oil by insisting on continuing a beach replenishment project that was started before the oil spill.
Oh yeah, this is absolutely our fault. I mean, there's, you know, the dead baby dolphin y'all saw out there was the dolphin's fault.
About that dead baby dolphin. While watching the cleanup operations, we watched several dolphins swimming less than 100 yards out. We can't be more than 200 yards off the coast of Grand Terre Island, and there's a mother dolphin pushing her dead baby. The head's been bitten off or eaten off by sharks, and just mournfully pushing it around in the water. The BP report says there's no evidence to prove that the oil spill had any adverse impact on dolphins. Strange mortality was already being observed in the area when the oil spill happened, and BP says the higher number of dead dolphins is actually a reflection on the fact that more people are watching now than before the spill. Graham says it's another classic deflection by BP.
Now, the independent scientists have taken a look at this, and they have found, in fact, that they do believe that the two are linked. BP's paid scientists and consultants and press office have come out and said they're not.
The birds are landing in it. I mean, the fish are swimming in it. It's got to affect the ecology some kind of way.
5 years after the oil spill, Gulf shrimp were still scarce. Many families with generations in the shrimping business said that they were forced to find new livelihoods. Jacqueline Kelly talks with one of those shrimpers at a march in downtown New Orleans on April 20th, 2015.
Keith Blair Manuel, 56, of Gonzales, Louisiana.
Name by name, a white rose was placed in the water to remember the 11 crew members who died in the Deepwater Horizon explosion 5 years ago today. Today, dozens took to the streets of the French Quarter to mark the 5th anniversary of the BP oil spill. And for marchers, today's demonstration was just as much about the past as it is the future.
The bottom line is that we haven't recovered from this disaster, and we're going and drilling in deeper and darker places in the Gulf of Mexico. And our ability to respond is nowhere near our ability to extract.
$500 million worth of BP commercials got the world believing everything's okay.
But George Bersich says the Gulf Coast is far from okay. He's been a commercial oyster farmer and shrimp fisherman for 30 years, but now he's being forced to give up his livelihood.
I'm depressed because I can't go do what I used to do. You know, I lived my life and I was going to end my life on my shrimp boat, and now I got to take shrimp tours. I'm going into a new business, overnight shrimp tours.
And while BP says there has been no long-term impact to the wildlife or our Gulf Coast communities, marchers like Bersich tell a much different story about the recovery.
We just left Davant, Louisiana, where fishermen are saying they haven't been paid. We just saw posts on the Gulf Restoration Network that there's oil still coming on shore. So the goal today is to make sure the nation knows the truth.
And it's not just the wildlife and the future of our seafood industry that is a concern.
What I'm worried about is the people who didn't get any health payments. Who's going to pay for that bill? Me and you. It's going to come out of our tax dollars. And the people are sick for no reason.
Take responsibility, BP!
Less than 3 months after the 5th anniversary, BP would agree to the largest environmental settlement of all time. The majority of the money, about $5 billion for Louisiana alone, would go to restoring the environment. Here's my report from July 2nd, 2015, when that deal was announced.
I am here today to announce the largest environmental settlement in history.
After 3 months of intense negotiations, BP laid down its arms today and agreed to pay for environmental damages, lost state and local government revenues, and federal pollution fines. And the big winner is Louisiana, with at least $6.8 billion overall and $5 billion specifically earmarked for environmental restoration projects.
We anticipate somewhere around $8.7 billion in coastal restoration enhancement actions. That will make a significant step forward in restoring our coast.
BP was happy to settle now because Judge Carl Barbier was about to rule on federal Clean Water Act fines, which could have hit $13.7 billion. The fines in the settlement are much lower, $5.5 billion, but the natural resource fines were higher than expected and cut out years of litigation.
The $7.1 billion for the whole Gulf Coast, $5 billion for Louisiana. So whatever you think would have happened under the Clean Water Act penalties, Louisiana did good to settle this.
Also getting money quicker than expected are state governments, who get $4.9 billion for lost tax revenues, and 511 local governments, like parishes, counties, and towns, which can claim a combined $1 billion in the next 60 days.
It took 20 years to get the Exxon Valdez, which is a much smaller case, resolved. The biggest chunk of this case has now been resolved in about 5 years.
So the money was starting to flow from that record settlement and restoration projects were underway. But what about preventing a similar disaster from happening in the future? Coming up in our next episode of WWL Investigates with David Hammer, we take a look at how government oversight failed and how new safety guidelines would try to avoid more disastrous mishaps. If you missed the first episode of WWL Investigates, you can catch up on WWL+. Just download the app on your TV to watch for free and stay tuned as WWL Investigates continues with our look back at the BP oil spill now 15 years later.